Well, hello everyone, and welcome back to another True Crime Time with Junebug. That's me. And you never know what you're gonna get. Last time I had gross hair and braids, very casual looking, barely any makeup. This time, for me, this is like full glam. I did a full face today. And my hair is freshly cleaned. It's so soft, so if I keep touching it, I'm sorry. I'm also not used to it being down. Because just with my actual like work, this doesn't make sense to be down. Anyway, ignore how big my forehead is. The ring light likes to shine directly at it. But anyway, I wanted to say thank you for the likes and the support on the last true crime I did was about Sharon Lee Gallegos. It bothers me slightly that it's at like 699 views. I'm like, just one more. Just come on, just be 700 even. I don't want to be greedy though, because that's the most views I've gotten on a true crime or any video on this channel in a very long time. So thank you so much. And if you're new, I hope I make videos that you'll want to stay for, if that made sense. But let's get into it. So I mentioned in the last true crime that I knew what I was going to cover next, like right now. And I mentioned it took place in Australia, and I didn't realize it was a real case. So today, if you know this, if you're old enough to know this, we are talking today about Azaria Chamberlain. And this took place August 17th of 1980. So for me to actually like have grown up and like known about this, slim, because this happened 19 years before I was born. And I always do the age of the victim in case children bother you. Just sometimes it does bother people. So 9 weeks or a little over 2 months old. This took place in, I'm sorry, Australia. I didn't think to look up how to pronounce this before I started filming, but Uluru? U-L-U-R-U? Uluru, Australia. And the status is tiny silver lining is solved. But it depends on who you ask. Although I think nowadays people are like, yeah, it's solved. We know what happened. So if you're like me and you would still be confused with this information, there are so many pop culture references to it. There's a book called Evil Angels, which turned into a movie. It may have had Meryl Streep in it. Oh yes, if I just looked at my notes, yes, it says Meryl Streep. There was an opera called Lindy about this. There's a mini-series called Through My Eyes. It was mentioned on many podcasts, and it had its own podcast. It's been referenced on Buffy the Vampire Slayer, The Simpsons, as I feel like everything has at this point. It even mentioned in the Rugrats movie and on Seinfeld, which is the reason I heard about this, sort of. I'm gonna try to put up how I learned what this was here. Because this case started the saying, the dingo took my baby, or the dingo got my baby. And then cute Elaine saying, maybe the dingo got your baby. And obviously Seinfeld aired before I was born. Well, it started airing before I was born. So when they did this like little skit thing, no idea what they were referencing. I'm like, why is the laugh track going nuts? I don't get it. And I never really looked into it much further than that. But today we are talking about the actual case behind the saying, the dingo got my baby, or the dingo took my baby, dingo ate my baby. There's many variations, but yes, if you're like me or similar in age, you didn't realize this was an actual case that inspired this, and you were confused why people and in pop culture they would say that saying, at least for me. So we're gonna start with baby Azaria Chantel Lauren Chamberlain. She was born on June 11th of 1980 to Alice Lynn or Lindy Chamberlain and Michael Leigh Chamberlain in Queensland, Australia. She was their third child and their first daughter. Now, her brother Aiden was born in 1973, and her brother Reagan was born in 1976. This is where, like, I would mention a bit about the upbringing, but obviously not much on her upbringing, considering she lived to be only about 2 months old. But they seemed like a pretty average family. Speaking of, a classic thing families like to do, they went on a camping trip. This camping trip was about mid-August of 1980 in Uluru, if I'm pronouncing that right. Or it's called Ayers Rock nowadays. I think it goes by both, honestly. And other families were camping too. It wasn't just them with their baby and 2 young children just like out in the outback. Like, there was other families that were camping too. But everything seemed to be going fine on the little camping trip before tragedy struck, unfortunately, on their camping trip. Lindy, the mom, went to check on Azaria, sleeping in the tent, and saw she was gone. This is when Lindy ran out of the tent and yelled, quote, "A dingo took my baby," end quote. Now, at first, I don't really know what led her to this conclusion, but as I dug more into research, I think she said she saw a dingo like running away from the tent. But, you know, they're pretty fast. But she insisted a dingo took baby Azaria. Now, the police were notified right away, makes sense, and the search began. And unfortunately, the only thing they found was Azaria's jumpsuit about a week later. This jumpsuit was also about 2.5 miles from the tent and was blood-stained around the neck. Now, due to the unusual circumstances and the fact Azaria's body couldn't be found, an inquest was held, which I'm not going to claim I know much about the law, especially Australian law. But basically, from what I could see, an inquest is to figure out the cause of someone's death if it's an unusual or odd circumstance. Sorry, the furnace kicked on. It's about like 18 degrees here in Michigan, so that's going to be kicking on a lot. So I'll try to talk louder. Now, this inquest was held from December 15th of 1980 to February 20th of 1981. And remember, Azaria was taken mid-August on their camping trip. Now, this inquest, there wasn't too much, like, it wasn't too deep dived into, but it was determined Azaria was most likely taken by a dingo and killed. Now, the Supreme Court, like, of Australia, not here in the US, obviously, they didn't seem to like this answer. So a second inquest was done from December 1981 to February of 1982. So nearly a full year later. Now, there was a lot more deep diving into evidence in the second inquest. That's where I found a lot of stuff I have written in my notes. So we're going to talk about why, like, evidence for the dingo being the culprit. Now, dingo experts, those are a thing, provided info like a dingo's jaw is so strong it could easily tear through like seatbelts. And there's an example they gave of a dingo removing a bundle of meat from its wrapping without tearing the wrapping, because it was questioned like why her baby jumpsuit wasn't shredded. But then they provided evidence of dingoes unwrapping things without necessarily destroying what they took off of what they wanted. They also show the size of a dingo's jaw, because it was questioned if a dingo was even like big enough for that. And it's not a great picture, but it gets the point across, so there you go. But also, one of the main things was people were bringing up the fact for 2 years prior to Azaria's snatching, there had been requests for the government to deal with the dingo problem in this area. It said the dingo population was becoming really large in this area and very aggressive, like biting people. They were becoming big and aggressive. They didn't like people camping there. The dingoes didn't. However, on the flip side, after they do the dingo evidence, it's heavily suggested in the second inquest that the Chamberlains were responsible for Azaria's death. And when I say Chamberlains, mainly Lindy is who they were after, the mom. And they argued that this was just in fact straight up murder. But evidence for this included, like, why were they camping at a place with lots of dingoes? Like, they theorized they used it for a scapegoat, which personally, being from America, I'm just taught that like any place in Australia is kind of dangerous, like animal and creature wise. So I don't know if they could go somewhere like that's not in the city that you wouldn't have to deal with animals. So that's just my opinion though. Now, they thought the blood around the neck of Azaria's little jumpsuit, they thought it came from a throat slitting, and also the lack of the body and evidence to prove otherwise that this wasn't true. And a blood of an unknown origin could be found in their car. So basically what I saw, they thought Lindy distracted her son so she could take Azaria to their car, like without being noticed. She thought Lindy cut her daughter's neck with scissors, hid her body, and went back and staged a quote-unquote dingo taking, and then quote-unquote sounded the alarm that a dingo took her baby. So they thought, yeah, she just snuck off to the vehicle, slit her own baby's throat, and faked a dingo taking, which seems like a pretty bold thing to make, in my opinion, but I wasn't there. Now, there is so much more involved in this evidence-wise. I'm trying to just like give cliff notes here. Especially, there was so much stuff they nitpicked with that jumpsuit alone, because it's like this is what they have. They have a jumpsuit. It's pretty much what they had for evidence. And there's also a bit more like with the jumpsuit why they thought like Azaria was killed by her mother, like the fact that the buttons were all the way buttoned up, and it's just things like that. There's very lot of nitpicking with the jumpsuit, and I figured for both of our sakes, you didn't want to hear me rumble on about all of the bulletin points I saw about the jumpsuit alone. I can maybe upload a pic for you though of all the things involved with the jumpsuit. So here you go. Okay, I do also want to note again, sorry, didn't mean to shake you. There was also more evidence to suggest the dingo theory again, and not just like jumpsuit dingo expert wise. Like other campers said they heard baby cries, they heard growls, they found some paw prints, not just campers, but like some police too. There's blood found in the tent. I don't know if they ever tested to see whose blood or if they could do that in 1980. They just said there's blood in the tent. There was canine hairs found on the jumpsuit and in the tent. And I do want to note, the Chamberlains did not have a dog, and the jumpsuit was found near an unknown dingo den. Now, from this stuff, you could probably maybe theorize, like, with all the evidence for the dingo theory, and that's just what they said, that's why they called the police, you would think they'd follow the first inquest suit and say, yeah, it was most likely a dingo. No. Even with all the evidence on the dingo theory, Lindy was sentenced to life in prison for killing her baby. She was put in prison October 29th of 1982. Now her husband Michael, they didn't think he actually like committed the murder, but he was convicted of being an accessory after the fact and was given an 18-month suspended sentence. Again, not good with like the legally stuff, so I don't know what makes it suspended. I just thought like, he'd just go in jail for 18 months or prison. But Lindy would serve her sentence at Berrima prison for less than a month until she had to be taken out to, guess what? She had to give birth. Yeah, Lindy was pregnant, like about to pop, when they sentenced her to life in prison for killing her previous child. So her fourth child was born on November 17th of 1982, and her name was Kalia. Sorry, my voice cracked. Kalia. And shortly after giving birth, Lindy went back to prison. From what I heard, Kalia had to be bounced around from foster homes because her dad couldn't take her either. He's also serving a sentence. Her siblings are too young. So I think she bounced from relatives and foster homes. It just wasn't a good situation all around. Now, multiple appeals were made to try to get Lindy, mainly Lindy, out of prison to like say they're not guilty. And they were all dismissed. They're like, no, a ferocious animal could not have done that. No, it was Lindy. Had to be. Now, Michael would serve his full sentence, remember, because it's 18 months. And Lindy would remain in prison for the next 3 years until new evidence was discovered. Because on February 2nd of 1986, remember this started in 1980, Azaria's jacket was found partially buried next to a dingo lair in an isolated location near Uluru, where they were camping. And now, might I mention, the police insisted this jacket didn't exist when Lindy brought it up to them. They thought she was just wearing the jumpsuit. But Lindy insisted the jumpsuit was under her jacket. Police did not believe her. Well, until they found the jacket. And it was only by chance that they found the jacket due to a tourist's death, unfortunately. His name was David Brett, and he fell whilst climbing in the area. And it took, I think it was like 8 days to find his body because it's Australia. There's dangerous critters, like, it just took a minute to find him. And that is when they stumbled upon the jacket in a previously unknown, like, dingo haven. Now, 5 days after the discovery of the jacket, Lindy was released from prison and the case was reopened, which I think that's fair. Yeah, we found the jacket that she said she was wearing even though we didn't believe her. Yeah, we're gonna have to let her out of prison. I'm guessing that's how the phone call went. So soon after this, Lindy and Michael were acquitted of the crime in 1988. Now, 2 years later, so 1990, the family was awarded $1.3 million for wrongful imprisonment, which you think, oh, that's nice. They actually like sort of took accountability. Well, sure, it's nice, but you know what? That amount apparently only covered barely 1/3 of their legal expenses from this case. Now, jumping ahead, but 5 years later, in December of 1995, a third inquest would show the coroner found the cause of Azaria's death to be, quote unquote, unknown. So, I mean, better than like homicide or murder, but they're still not like acknowledging that a dingo did this until 2012. A fourth, yes, you heard me, a fourth and final inquest was held, and it was finally ruled that a dingo was responsible for Azaria's death. And at this point, she was given a new death certificate that stated that fact. Lindy was very relieved, from what I heard. So let's talk about the aftermath, because if you were alive during this time, this was sensationalized in the news, like globally, not just in Australia. Like it's being mentioned in American TV shows. So like what happened afterward, like with their lives? So as we know, many pop culture things obviously came from this, but Lindy and Mike would actually divorce in 1991 after 22 years of marriage. Lindy would remarry in 1992, and she currently lives in Australia with a new man, and she is 75 years old. Now, Mike would also remarry in 1994 and have another child in 1996. He would later pass away in 2017 at the age of 72 due to complications of acute leukemia. Now, I didn't see much on the kids. I'm pretty sure they are all alive and well. They are choosing to stay out of the spotlight, which I cannot blame them. And from what I saw, most, if not all of them, are like married and settled down at this point in their lives. And I actually saw a 60-minute special came out in 2022 with some of the family in it. And that is the legit real case behind A Dingo Took My Baby, which as someone who's done the research, and it just seems like they went through so much, it almost seems cruel that like a joke came from it. I can maybe understand if it was proven that she like 100% was like the murderer, which she's not from what obviously evidence suggests. I could understand like making fun of her for saying a dingo did it when it was clearly her who did it. But a dingo did do it. A dingo took this little baby and killed it. And I saw, because they have actually a whole list of like dingo attacks online, and I saw after Azaria's taking and killing, there was a 9-year-old boy named Clinton Gage who was killed by dingoes in 2001. Someone 9 years older than, sorry, I thought that was Susan. 9 years older than Azaria was taken down by dingoes. I don't want to say taken down, that sounds harsh, but you know what I mean. So it is very possible a wild animal could kill a baby. And just before you make, and I don't know how many people who watch this would like make a dingo baby joke, but just remember that there is legit loss behind this. And I guess that's, sorry, there's something in my eye, and I guess that's what the takeaway is, I feel like, for this case. But that is it today. I do not know what I'm doing next. I think I'm jumping back to America. There's a lot of crimes that happen here. Let's be honest. I have many cases to choose from. But that is it. Hope you enjoyed this. Thanks again for the support on the last one, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye.